this video, I'm going to show you how to decorate this Harry Potter cake. Hi, it's Karolyn. If you want to learn how to bake and decorate amazing cakes, then I would love for you to join me by hitting subscribe and the bell. If you want to get right into the video, there are chapters linked below. So I'm doing one of my most requested designs, this Harry Potter theme that somebody asked me the last time I posted the cake to film it. So I filmed it this time for you. And I am already starting with my cakes already baked, filled, and iced, and they are in the refrigerator ready to be decorated. I have videos showing you how I bake, fill, ice, refrigerate cakes. All of that will be linked in the description. And also I am going to reference a bunch of different videos and all of the tools that I use as well. Everything that I use will be linked in the description. I get so many people saying, hey, what's that tool? What's that tool? Just look in the description. I link everything there for you. So let's get started.
All right, we're starting off by making the Rice Krispie Hat. I have some marshmallows, some Rice Krispies, and a little bit of Crisco shortening that I'm getting on the inside of this glass bowl. I'm doing about half the bag of marshmallows. I'm just eyeballing it. It's probably like 6 ounces. Melt it in the microwave for about a minute, stir it, and then I'm just adding like a cup of Rice Krispies at a time. And look, that's way too marshmallowy, so I'm going to add a little bit more Rice Krispies until I get it to this consistency where it's like equal Rice Krispies, equal marshmallows, and that looks so much better. Now I'm going to get some Crisco on the counter and on this 5-inch cake pan because I'm putting this on a 5-inch cake tier, and I want to make sure that I make this the right size. My countertop is clean, my hands are clean, and I'm just getting this mixture out of the bowl. And I am going to get some Crisco on my hands so it doesn't stick to my hands and roll this up into a pretty tight ball. And then I want to get this into a cone shape. So I'm just working with my hands and trying to make it more narrow at the top and flatter on the bottom. I actually take it and smack it on the countertop a little bit just to get it pretty flat. And I'm just trying to like roll it on its side. You see how I'm just building this cone shape? I put it on top of that cake pan to make sure it's the right size, and it was a little too wide at the bottom. I want it about an inch in from the edges. So I'm just refining this, trying to get it to the correct size. And the marshmallow is still a little hot, so it's not really holding its shape that well yet. So I sprinkled some cornstarch down on the bottom of the pan so it doesn't stick to it. And then I'm just going to set it on here and put it aside for a little bit for it to start to dry. Now I just want to measure how tall my cakes are so I can make sure that I print everything out the size that I want it to be. And here it is. I will link these in the description below. And after I print it out, I like to hold it up against the cake, and that looks like it's the right size. So I wash my hands. Apparently, if I don't show me washing my hands, nobody thinks that I ever do. So my hands are clean. I have some tan fondant and some yellow fondant that I'm going to roll out. And I'm going to sprinkle down a little bit of cornstarch. That's not powdered sugar, it's cornstarch. Powdered sugar will make everything sticky. And I just want to roll it out and make sure that it is long and wide enough so this fits on top of it. And you can see how thin that is. I'm going to set that aside and do the same thing for the yellow one. And I'm going to put that on top, make sure it fits, and you can see how thick that is rolled out. Now, all of my fondant has Tylose powder mixed into it. This is Gumtex, Tylose powder, CMC. It's all the same thing. It's going to help your fondant dry hard and make it a lot easier to work with. It's going to hold its shape. It's going to be easier to cut. I will link that below. Now, as this marshmallow cools, this starts holding its shape a little better, so I just want to reshape it a little bit because it could have sank a little bit as it was settling. And now I have a piece of non-skid pad underneath my cutting board so it doesn't shift around, a wet paper towel, a X-Acto knife, and a Dresden tool. It has a thinner end and a thicker end. I just love that tool, and a little bit of water. So now I'm going to stick this on top and do my trace, cut, and smooth method. And I'm not tracing exactly on that black line. I want it to be a little thicker. So I'm tracing just outside of the black line. I'm going to trace the outside. Make sure you don't press too hard. You just want to be able to transfer the line onto the fondant below. And then when I do the inside pieces, again, I'm not going to trace on the black line. I'm going to come in a little bit and trace on the white part just so this is a little bit thicker. It's going to be a little bit easier to work with. Peel it back, make sure that you can see the lines. And now I need to cut a shallow cut because you can see I'm going to mess up the fondant if I try to cut too deep right away. So I'm just putting the tip of the X-Acto knife in the fondant and creating a shallow cut. And then I'm going to stick the tip all the way down to the board and use that line as a guide. This way I'm not going to mess up the fondant when I'm cutting it out. So you want to cut all the inner pieces first. These tiny pieces can be a big pain in the butt to work with. So once I have it cut out, I'm going to flip it over, use my tools, use my fingers to smooth the jagged edges that are created in the fondant whenever you cut anything out. Flip it back over and smooth my cuts. So every single time I cut anything out of fondant, I am going to take the time, flip it over, smooth it from the back, and smooth it from the front. You may not see me do it every time, but I do it every single time. It just makes your pieces look so much better. And now I'm going to do the same thing for the outside. So I'm going to cut a shallow cut and then cut a deeper cut, cutting the whole thing out, flip it over, smooth it out, and then flip it over and smooth it from the front. And I want to realign that back on top of the picture so it is not distorted while it dries. And let's set that aside. Now I'm going to do the same thing. So I have that tan piece of fondant and I'm going to trace the oval on the outside. If you printed the oval separate than the font, you would just trace the oval and then stick the font on top and trace the font inside of the oval. And I am tracing the outline of the lettering here, and this can be a little pain in the butt because the letters are tiny. So I'm just tracing the outline. You can see that very faintly, but you'll be able to see it a little better as I trace. Now I have these edible markers. One end is thicker, one end is thinner. I love these markers. So I know this is not good for video purposes, but I needed a flashlight because if I was not filming, I could have my head right on top and be able to see these letters. But since I'm filming, the camera is above, so I need a little assistance. So sorry if it's a little too bright. But do you see how I'm just lightly tracing the outline? So I'm kind of using the edge of that point of the tip of the marker, I'm sorry. I do not want to mess up the fondant. So now I want to cut it out. So I'm cutting out the oval. And smoothing my cut. So I'm trying to round that outer edge. And I want to set that on a paper towel. I have my favorite airbrush gun. If it's turned all the way up, the pressure is high. All the way low, I get a little spotted technique, which I will show you, and there's the on-off button. So I have a little bit of chocolate brown airbrush coloring. You must use airbrush coloring in an airbrush gun. You can't use gel coloring. And I'm doing a little tester on the paper towel, and now you can see I'm lightly pulling back that trigger, and I'm just doing light sweeping motions, just trying to get the outer edge of this a little bit darker with the brown. And when you're airbrushing, you don't want to do a heavy coat, so it's better to do a few lighter coats than a heavy coat. And now you can see I turned the dial all the way to the left, and it's giving like a spotted look to it. I just like that look. I don't know. I think it looks pretty cool, so I frequently do that. And always rinse your airbrush gun in hot water when you're done using it. Now I let that airbrush coloring dry, and I am taking my time to color in all of these letters. Again, I'm not using the point of the tip. I'm kind of like using it on a little bit of an angle, and this took forever to do. So it's nice that I could speed it up a little bit and just color in the letters. Now I'm using about the fourth circle in from the middle. I want to make the glasses. So I have some black fondant. There is Tylose powder mixed into this fondant. And when I roll out fondant into a log, it's a little tricky. So you see how I have my fingers, like I'm not pressing really hard. I don't want to put my finger marks in there. So I'm starting in the middle and then pulling out. You see how I'm trying to just get it to an even thickness. And then I'm going to wrap it around the circle cutter. And where it meets, I'm going to, oops, it's a little too long there. I'm going to get a little bit of water on the edges, and then press them together. So I want to keep it around the circle cutter, that way it holds its shape. And I'm going to do the same thing for the other one. And then I'm going to cut two little pieces off of the end and have that little nose piece. Perfect, let's set that aside. And now I'm stacking the cake. So I have a stacking tutorial that goes into complete detail on how I stack cakes, and I am going to link that below so I don't have to explain it too much. But I measure my straws, I cut off the marker, and then I push the straws into the bottom tier, get some buttercream down, my clean hands, stack the top tier on, make sure it's level, and then I'm going to dowel the cake and fill that buttercream, fill the hole with some buttercream. And now I want to have no border on this top tier, so I'm just filling it in with a little bit of icing and then just using a spatula dipped in hot water to smooth that out. I actually have a video showing you how I do that. It's one of the first videos I ever made, so I will link that in the description if you want to get into more detail to how to do that. So now again, I'm making the wand, so there is some Tylose powder mixed into this fondant, and I want to leave a little bit of that skewer out at the bottom. So I have a video showing you how I cover dowels and fondant, and I will also link that. So you see I'm rolling it in a log, press the skewer down into it, and then I'm rolling it out again, like making sure that I'm not pressing my fingers, so I'm not making any finger marks. Bend it at the top where it's sticking over the top, and I'm cutting off the excess and just continuing to do that process till I get it to the right thickness. And I'm going to cut off the excess at the bottom. So I want to be able to make a handle too, so I need a little bit of room at the bottom. And at the top, I want it to come to not too much of a point, but I just want to refine that edge so it's not too flat and round that off a little bit. Now, I want the handle to be about that long. So I wet the skewer again, roll that out into a log, and then press it down and roll this on. So this is, I could probably go into a really detailed tutorial showing you how I do this, but seeing it like this, you can kind of get the gist of what I'm doing. So I cut that top part off where it's going to meet the tan fondant so it can have a flatter edge. And I'm just pushing the fondant up that skewer so it meets that tan fondant, pinching the edge to refine it. And now I'm trying to press that black fondant up so it's meeting the fondant, you know. So I'm pinching the edges just so it gives a sharper look to it. And now I want to make a handle look. So I'm taking my finger and really pressing into the fondant to make it ergonomic, if you will. I'm going to do that on the top and the bottom. And you see how I still have a little piece of the skewer sticking out at the bottom? That's going to be necessary for me to be able to stick it into the cake board. And there we go. It looks more like a handle. And I'm going to set that aside for it to dry. You know, I got this. This has been drying for a couple days, so it's pretty hard and it can hold its shape. I have some Roll Come Super Gold and I sprinkle it in this cup, add a little bit of lemon extract, and use a paintbrush and just paint this gold. So I'm painting the back first, and I want to make sure that I get in all the inner pieces and the inside. So I'm turning my brush to the side, making sure that I get all the inside edges and the outside edge, and then I let that dry for about 5 minutes, flip it over. And then I'm going to do the same thing and paint the front, making sure that everything is covered in the gold. And let's put this back on the paper and set that aside to dry. Now I'm going to add the texture on the bottom tier. I got this out of the fridge. This icing is solid. I'm not going to mess this cake up, and I'm getting some buttercream, a really thin layer of buttercream around this entire bottom tier. I have a video where I go into complete detail on how I do this, and I will link that in the description. Get a piece of plastic, and I'm just going to spin the turntable and press the plastic against the cake so I can get a little bit of texture in that icing. After the first round, I'm going to refine it again with another clean piece of plastic. And now I want to take my spatula and just get rid of that excess icing that's sticking out over the top. And I'm running it under hot water. You don't see me doing that, but that's what I'm doing. I'm just rinsing off the spatula. And one more time for good measure, I'm taking another clean piece of plastic and just refining that texture. and just cleaning up the very bottom of the cake with a spatula. Perfect. Let's put that back in the fridge. Now I have some Buckeye Brown and I want to color the fondant that I'm covering the hat with. So this needs a lot of brown. So I kneaded it together. It was still a little too light, and then knead it together a little bit more. And when you add a lot of coloring to fondant, sometimes it does get soft. So I add a little bit more Tyler's powder to help it stiffen up. And I need it to sit. I can't use it right away, so I just let it sit on some cornstarch. And now this piece is dry. It's easy to handle, and I'm just using this microplane and shaving off all the extra bumps. It makes it so much smoother, so much easier to work with, and then wipe the excess crumbs away. And again, I'm cleaning my hands so you guys can see my hands are not dirty when I'm handling this. Get a little bit of icing and wipe it on this piece. And now I'm going to keep the hot water running, and I'm using my hands to smooth this out. And I want the icing to be thick enough where I press into it and I can make an impression. So I don't want to be able to see the Rice Krispies through the icing. Just using the water to smooth it out. I took off a little bit too much, so I grabbed some more icing and I'm just kind of patching that area. Just very important that you don't want to see the Rice Krispies through this. And I'm going to set that aside, wash my hands, and now I'm ready to use this fondant. It's been sitting out for a little bit, and look how smooth this is. I have a video showing you how I get fondant this smooth, and I will link it in the description, but it's not going to crack. It's not going to be annoying when I'm working with it. Sprinkle down some cornstarch, and let's roll it out. And I want to roll it out like not too thin, but not too thick. I need to be able to shape this fondant. This hat can get a little tricky. So I just want to show you how thick this fondant is, and you can kind of see right there. But now let's lift it up, and I have it on a turntable on a cutting board, so it's going to be easier to work with. So I'm making sure I'm lifting this fondant up at the top so it doesn't rip. So I want to make sure that this fondant does not rip at the very top, basically. And I'm smoothing it out starting at the top third of it. And do you see how I'm lifting it up? Like, I don't want to push the fondant down. Usually when you're covering a cake with fondant, you want to make sure that you're pushing it down the cake. But this, I need some excess fondant, so I'm trying to like lift it up as I'm smoothing it. I hope this makes sense. So do you see how I'm gradually trying to get out all of the wrinkles? And now I'm trying to lift the fondant up. And you will see why I'm doing this, because I need to make a point at the very top. I'm trying to flatten that out on the bottom. And I'm just using a cutter to cut off the excess, but I'm trying to keep as much on as I can right now. Now start to lift it up. And this is why it's so important to have some icing underneath. Because I have that excess icing underneath, I'm able to slide this fondant around and shape this into the correct position. So now I want to find what looks most symmetrical, and that's going to be the very front of the hat. And now I'm going to use my thumb to make the impressions for the eyes. And I am looking at a picture for reference. I'm not just doing this from the top of my head. So you see how I'm kind of pinching it into the right position. And again, it's all because I have that extra icing underneath it that I can squeeze this and it's going into the correct shape. So do you see how I'm carefully just lifting this up a little bit at a time? I'm not just trying to pinch it all at once. I'm just trying to carefully slide the fondant up. Now I'm going to use ball tools. I love these ball tools for this. It really helps get these details in here. Again, I'm not pressing too hard on here. I do not want to create a hole in the fondant, because if you create a hole in the fondant, then you're going to be able to see the icing underneath. So again, I'm trying to shape the mouth. So I'm just using different size ball tools. This end of this one ball tool is great because I can get into these little positions. And do you see how I'm squeezing it to give it a little bit of shape? And I am not a sculptor by any means. I'm just looking at this picture and trying to make it look similar. So I'm trying to create the mouth here and then give him a little cheekbone action just by using my tools and my fingers. And do you see how I can slide the fondant up? It's because I have that excess icing. How many times do I have to say that? I think you guys get it by now. But I can move this fondant easily into these wrinkly positions because of that excess icing underneath. Usually, when I cover something with Rice Krispies, I don't want extra icing underneath because the fondant slides all over the place and is a big pain in the butt. But for something like this, it's necessary. And you see how I'm making these lines and then squeezing it together to form the wrinkles. So I'm just kind of looking at the hat like, okay, there needs to be another wrinkle here. You know, the tip has to kind of come to a point, so I'm trying to squeeze that and just adding extra wrinkles and lines wherever I feel like it'll look good. Now I want to trim the brim. So take a little bit off at a time. You don't want to take too much off because you can't put it on after you cut it off. So I need to remember this is going on a 5-inch cake and I don't want the brim to be too big or too small. And that looks like it's going to be a little too big. I have that 5-inch cake pan there. So I'm going to trim off a little bit more. And that looks like it's pretty good. I have that 5-inch pan there. It looks like it'll fit on top really well. So I'm just smoothing out my cuts with my fingers. And I want to lift this up with a spatula, get a little bit of cornstarch underneath and put it back on top. That way it's not going to stick to that cutting board when I'm ready to lift it up. So I have a half a paper towel that I folded in half and rolled it up. I cut it in half and then I'm going to squeeze the end a little bit and just stick it underneath here in random spots so the brim can dry with a little wave to it. And that looks good. Let's set that aside. Now I have this edible image here. I have a video showing you how I work with edible images and I will link that in the description. So I'm carefully cutting this out because I don't have a circle cutter or a Cricut. And I'm going to flip this over, get a little bit of piping gel on the back. I have some thin black fondant here and stick that on top. And then I'm going to get a circle cutter and make sure that I have an even border the entire way around and cut that out and smooth my cuts. Perfect. And let's set that aside. Now I want to airbrush the hat, so I have a little bit of brown airbrush coloring and testing it on that paper towel. And let's do the wand first. I lied. So I'm just, no rhyme or reason, just trying to get a little bit of depth to that. Now to do the hat, I am carefully doing the edge of the brim just to give it a little more interest there. And then I'm pulling the airbrush gun away from the hat a little bit using circular motions, get rid of that excess cornstarch, and just trying to deepen the color. I don't want it to be all over. Like I still want some of that light brown to show through the darker airbrush. And then I turn the dial all the way back so I get that spotty look again like I did earlier. And I'm just spraying that spotty look all over the hat as well. And now I have some super black airbrush coloring and spray that in there, test it on the paper towel, and I want to deepen the details with the black. Now I am pulling the trigger back very, very slightly and just trying to get pretty close so I can get really deep into these wrinkles with the black. And now I got a little bit more brown airbrush coloring in the gun and I'm just spraying the entire hat, trying to add a little bit more of that brown color to deepen it up. And that looks good. Let's set that aside. Now I totally forgot to attach the nose piece, so I'm getting a little bit of piping gel on the ends. And this piece is so small, it can be a little annoying to work with. And then just stick the 2 circles to it. And let's set that aside to dry. Now I got the cake out of the refrigerator, and as always I'm taking a wet paper towel to wipe the cake board clean. And I want to stick 2, these are 8 or 10-inch skewers into the top of the cake, get a little buttercream down, and I want to put the hat on, making sure that it's facing the front of the cake. and dust off the excess cornstarch with a clean paintbrush. And then I forgot to mention, I dried this on a cake dummy so it could dry with a curve to it. And I want to get a little bit of piping gel around the perimeter, and I'm going to do a little bit of icing in the middle. That way the icing is not going to stick out of the sides. And people ask all the time how I anchor pieces into cakes. So do you see how I'm sticking these toothpicks down on an angle so the tips are sticking up? And I'm basically going to hook this on those two toothpicks so it's not going to slide down. However, you need to make sure that you press the toothpicks in far enough so they're not going to poke out the front of the piece, which they did a little bit, so I'm using a handle just to press those pieces back in. I have some edible gold leaf. I will link this in the description. And I need to make it a little wet, so I have a paintbrush that I dipped in some water and just wiping it where I want to put this gold leaf. And I'm carefully just pressing tiny pieces against the cake to transfer that leaf onto the cake. And I'm starting down at the bottom, and I'm kind of going up the sides to the top right side of the cake. And that looks good. Now I want to find where I want to put this on the cake. So I'm making a mental note, where is that skewer going to stick in? Get a half a toothpick, and I'm going to hammer that in there so I can create a hole in the cake board, and then just try to make that hole a little bigger by sticking it back in there. Wiggle it around, get a little bit of piping gel on the bottom and a little bit of icing on the back of the handle where it's going to touch the cake. Slide that down into the hole and press it against the cake. And it's nice to have that textured buttercream on the bottom tier, because that way I can just take a paintbrush, any of that excess icing that was sticking out, I'm just blending it in. Now I'm going to get a little bit of icing on the back of this where it's going to touch the cake and press that against there. And getting some piping gel around the perimeter and icing in the middle of this edible image, and stick that on the cake as well. Now for the glasses, I didn't leave enough time for the centerpiece to dry, so I'm making a mental note, where is it touching the cake? On the bottom and on that part, so I'm getting a little bit of icing behind it wherever it's going to touch the cake. And then I can take a dry paintbrush and remove any excess icing. And I'm going to get some behind that middle piece as well. And for the other side, making a mental note, it's going to touch the cake there and there. So let's get icing down there and icing behind it and press it against the cake. And I really want to press this against the cake to make sure it's adhered. And I'm going to take a dry paintbrush and just remove that excess icing. And there is the cake. Adorable.
So there you go. I absolutely love this design. This is one of my favorite cakes to make. Now, the hat is the trickiest part, and I know it's a little difficult for me to relay the information of how to make it in this quick video. So if you guys want me to do a separate video just on how to do the hat, let me know, and I will do that the next time I make it. Now, if you don't have an airbrush machine, you can use petal dust. So you would just have to dip the paintbrush in the dust and then dust the hat and the little plaque that I made. It would have a little bit of a different outcome. It would take a little while longer to do, but it would still look good. Because I know an airbrush machine can be a little pricey, but once you have it, I always say once you have it, you're going to use it, and I will link it in the description. Now this cake is 5-inch and 7-inch tiers, and it feeds like 25 to 30 people. So I think that's it. Please like this video if you liked it. And if you are enjoying my tutorials, I would be so grateful if you could buy me a coffee. My link is pinned in the comments below. And you can keep in touch on socials and check out my website. Everything is listed in the description. And if you want to stick around, you can watch this video next and hit subscribe and the bell if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. I love you guys, and remember, it's cake. Have fun. I will see you on the next one. Bye.